We are delighted that you're joining us for another podcast of Wake Up Aligned, and it is the podcast for chiropractors where we get to talk about chiropractic lifestyle, and topics of interest. You can contact us through our email, and that is mailbag@amcfamily.com.
Welcome back to another episode of Wake Up Aligned. I am Tom Owen. I am president of a little group that you may have heard of before called AMC Aligned. And hard to believe, we are celebrating 30 years this year of helping and serving chiropractic and trying to make an impact each and every day with everything that we do. And I think by the time the show's over, this particular show, I think we're going to exemplify a lot of that. We're going to talk about some of the history that's taken place over these last few decades. But for the moment, before we get into that, I want to take a moment and introduce my co-host. We're real excited to have him on the show, Dr. Jeremiah Bursch. And if you don't know this guy, this is somebody you want to get to know. He's has a fantastic upper cervical practice up in Minnesota, but that's enough to know about, good enough to hear about. But it's more of his heart and his passion for chiropractors and the work that he's doing and his outreach for chiropractors. But Dr. Bursch, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me on the show. It's really quite an honor to be able to be on the show, but also it's really been an honor to be more involved with the AMC family and to be a part of the outreach and trying to help more doctors and ultimately trying to help in the efforts to try and save our profession. Because I don't know, I didn't understand all of the direction the profession was headed quite a few years ago. But now as I see what's happening and all, it's pretty frightening for what the future holds if we don't change something about what's going on.
Yeah, if we don't get our feet back underneath us, there's not going to be much left. And I don't want to scare a new graduate that's coming out of school, but I think you wanting to peel a little bit back on the onion and look at some of the history that's happened inside of AMC on this particular show. I know that was your goal, what you told me about before we started the show. I remember saying this kind of stuff 20 years ago. I was seeing the signs at that time on the horizon, but I still don't think I could have ever wrapped my head around that I was going to see what we're seeing. So yeah, number wise and practice size, things of that. Yes. Is there struggling going on? Absolutely. But it's more the heart, the identity and the value of this profession that you and I love so much that is really taking punches in the gut, in the chin. And if it's not us, then who? And folks, listeners, that doesn't excuse you. If it's not us, then who? Who's going to stand up? Who's going to carry this torch? Who's going to preserve what basically our forefathers of chiropractic fought so hard to give us the right? I'm old enough, hate to say this, but I'm old enough to have known the people that went to jail to give us the right, to give us the opportunity to carry this torch. And look at what we're doing with it. So with that said, Dr. Bursch, I'm excited to see where we go with this show. But before I even get started, it's my show. I get to decide where we start. Fair enough?
Fair.
I just like doing shout outs. If I didn't have the summits and it was just running, think about that, chiropractors. What if you didn't get to have the joy of the miracle of chiropractic? If you get to have that feedback from your patient, what would all the other work and all the other challenges, would it be worth it? And the answer is no. That's what keeps you coming for more and more. That's me. That's with me with chiropractors. I like knowing that what we're doing is impacting hundreds of thousands, millions of patients a month, and a lot of communities all across the country are being impacted. So I like to do shout outs to the AMC family, and I thought I would go a couple of different directions with this one. I want to give one shout out to somebody who we just said a minute ago that we're celebrating our 30th year as AMC. Just so happens the young lady that I want to give a shout out to first, can you believe this? She's not going to like this because it gives away part of her age, but she was sitting at the very first quote unquote official AMC conference meeting, which essentially was in the front reception room of one of our clinics in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area. And that meeting was literally put the word out that said we were going to have a conference. Anybody that wanted to be helped could be there. And Dr. Amanda Austin was a student at that time in life, and she came as a guest of Dr. Rick Long. And here we are 30 years later, and she has just had a phenomenal career. She's just got an awesome practice there on the north side of Chattanooga. But the shout out to her is we've been focusing this first quarter of coming out of the first quarter of 2024, and we have really been pruning for growth. Been the focal point in the summits, what we call the depth and genius classes, and it's been hard. It's been bring your lunch pail. It's not been raw seminars, right? For those of you that have been there, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes pruning that tree back, pruning the bush back is probably, it doesn't always feel that great, but it gives you opportunity for an explosive growth and become something more than what you were. And there is Dr. Austin. She is still green and growing. She's not ripe and rotting. And the shout out goes to her. I'm just proud as punch. Consistency is the key to success. It's usually not the most successful. Not the most talented. It's usually not the smartest in the room. It's usually the one that's most consistent in business that's going to win out. Well, Dr. Bill Harris used to say, he goes, there's mountains of wealth to be found in the monotony of exercise, or the simplest of exercise. And that's Dr. Austin. So she had 20 right now, as of today, when I'm looking at these stats, she has an acceptance of 25 of the last 26 care plans recommended have been accepted. So I would say that's a pretty good track record across the board. And then one more, and then we'll get going on the show, Dr. Bursch, because I know you want to take over. You want to be the host today. It's hard for me to give you the microphone, but that's what we're going to do, folks. We're going to give him a shot at it here in a minute. But Dr. Dominic Scaramosi, he is on track to do over 1.3 million again this year. All right. So that's not a first. He has done those kind of figures before. I think he's going, I want to say he's coming close to 10 years straight of $100,000 minimum growth year over year. He's done that for almost 10 years straight, if I'm right. But the point is, here's the ticket. It's not always about more. It's about being more efficient and more proficient. And that's my shout out to him. I'm proud of him. He's on pace to do over 1.3 this year, but he's going to do it by doing 5,000 less patient visits. Wow. Now that's becoming more efficient, proficient. And when you do it that way, you can be more productive and more profitable. That is Business 101. So big shout out to Dr. Dominic and Dr. Austin. And with that, I am going to turn the show over to my co-host, my guest, Dr. Jeremiah Bursch. So Dr. Bursch, take it away.
I was just going to mention, if I'm not mistaken, in doing all of that, Dr. Scaramosi also just recently referred another doctor to AMC, and so to still have that heart, still be looking for other doctors to help, even though his practice is obviously very busy, very successful, just speaks to the heart of that man and his passion for the profession as well. Grateful for that.
It's the biggest lesson. People that want to be successful long-term, the best lesson you can learn is to learn that it's not about you. If you can keep your focus in your business, especially as a chiropractor in the service industry, no decision is ever about us. It's what's best for the patient and it's what's best for the practice. And the same goes here. If you don't keep your eye out on the one more, who's your one more? Listeners, It's not just Dr. Scaramozzi's responsibility. It's all of our responsibility, reaching out and finding. And don't assume that everyone's just doing fine, because I'm like that. Bursch, you're like that. Scaramozzi's like that. Nobody likes to let other people know that they're struggling. We are masters at masquerading. So you can't assume that. Who's going to be the person that you reach out to and try to impact and share? Because it's not about referring. I know you use that term. That's not a term inside of AMC. It's sharing and caring. In other words, if you go to our website, it's amcfamily.com for a reason. Why is it a family? Because we share and we care for one another. We support one another, and we're always on the lookout for who we can share with. Shout out to Dr. Scaramozzi for doing that as well, caring enough to take the time to share, because he's got a busy schedule. He could easily make it all about himself, but he hasn't.
Yeah, and if I can pass out one more honorable mention to a doctor who's been with AMC for, I don't know exactly how long, but it's been quite a few years, 8 to 10 years, I would say. And he's been working at it, but he's a doc that definitely has a heart for the Lord. He has a heart for his patients. He has a heart for the profession. And I know that he's been struggling to fully implement and to reach his potential. And in here over the last 4 to 6 months, he's been starting to make changes in his office. He's essentially redoing his whole practice. He's getting in, learning a new technique. So he's bringing in more upper cervical for his office. He is going to be, I believe, getting installed a conical CT in the next couple of weeks here. And that's Dr. Kobe Perkins. And I think you would agree, Tom, that guy, he's just got a heart for, like I said, for the Lord, for his patients, and for chiropractic. And it's great to see that he's starting to blossom more fully. And it's neat to see, too, that a lot of times it seems like we see a lot of explosive growth, especially when doctors are starting their offices correctly, the Right Start program. And yet to see that people that just continue to be green and growing, like you said, people that are open to continuing to learn and apply, how they can continue to grow. And we don't always know when that timeline will be, when we'll hit that point where we actually see that explosive growth for all of us. But it's just really exciting to see that for him.
Yeah, Dr. Kobe it's hard to pick favorites, right? You do this for so long and you care about each and every one of them, because it's all about the individual. The most important person in your life should always be the person in front of you. And, but Dr. Kobe does hold a special place in my heart, and such a good guy. He's one of those that can come in the back of the room and he's so quiet and you could just overlook him, right? Because he doesn't stand out, but he's a mountain of a man when it comes to heart, that integrity. So I'm super thankful for him, and I'm very excited to hear about that growth. Again, green and growing, folks. In life, it's one of my lessons to my kids. I teach them, like, you're either green and growing or you're ripe and rotting. As soon as you think you got it all figured out and it's all about you, you're about pride comes before a fall. So it's exciting to see these long-term doctors like that. Kobe Perkins, Amanda Austin, Henri Dalliers. I don't have time to tell his whole story today. Another favorite, and he is 25 years into practice, and he went through a major challenge in this last 12 months, and yet he's experiencing some of his biggest growth and his biggest year ever in the middle of challenges. And that's what having a system to fall back on, that system will sustain you and even propel you, even though you've got a lot of distractions and challenges outside the office. The stability comes from your foundation.
Absolutely. And you mentioned it's hard to pick your favorites. And what I alluded to you when I mentioned trying to be on this podcast was all of us in practice, we have our favorite patient stories. We have the miracle cases. We have the ones where the patient wasn't proceeded. They didn't believe they were doing too badly. And as far as their health goes, and by simply being under chiropractic care, reach new levels in their life that they didn't even think they could reach. And so with 30 years under your belt, I was curious if you could share what are the ones that maybe stand out to you, the stories, the doctors, the practices, what were the ones that got you excited, maybe even in the earlier days. Some of us have been around for a while, so we do know some of these names and such, but there's names that sometimes we hear in the recordings even, and we're like, who's that doctor? We've never heard of that one, or Dr. Owen was referencing them and such. But I was wondering if you could share maybe a couple of those stories too, the doctors, the stories and the history behind some of the docs that you've seen. And I've been particularly proud to be a part of their story.
Well, first of all, the way you said that is, I'm proud to be a part of all of their stories. To me, it's almost a morning routine with me. One of the things that I say in my prayer time is, why me? And what do I have to offer? The fact I am extremely humbled to be a part of each and every one of their stories, whether I play a big part or a small part, just the fact I get to be part of it. And I think you feel the same way. And a lot of the blue coats, you come to one of our events, the summits, and sometimes they'll have the blue coats come forward and will lead the cheer or something like that. And I look down the line at these very successful individuals, and they're there for themselves. The fact none of you have an extra weekend just to give, but you do it. And I always marvel at that, just the heart of this company. But I think what you were asking me was in the history, just some of my favorite stories. Wow. It's hard to do there, Dr. Bursch. You're talking thousands, and they're all individuals. I think that's part of the reason why AMC is so good, how we can have that motto, any chiropractor, anywhere, in any situation. You can't do that in a volume play. You can't do that and just be a marketing company that says, hey, pay us blank amount of money and we'll take 100 of you if you want to sign this month. Get that engagement. You don't get that commitment. You certainly don't build long-term relationships that way. No, you treat each and every one of them as individuals, because every one of you listeners, hey, you're an individual. You might be a chiropractor. You might have the same degree as the other listeners' background, but you have disappointments, you have betrayals, various emotional factors, different upbringings. Some of you had it easy. Some of you had a good break for you. Everybody has to be treated as the individual. But anyway, you asked me a simple question, and I gave you an extended intro to the answer. That's really hard for me to do. Yeah. Sorry, it's just hard to do, to pick stories. Let me see if I can give one for you that most of the listeners probably don't know. And it was the one story. This was when I knew this was a bigger calling than what we had originally planned. Because as this wasn't planned, here we are 30 years later, and we've got this enormously impactful organization with all these people and all these resources. And there's nothing else like it in chiropractic. But once you understand that, we started to build that. We lived by the rule of find a need and fill it. There was a need happening in the 90s with the managed care, the changes with managed care, not even changes, the introduction of care. There was a big impact in our clinics, our Trina clinics. We weren't experiencing any of that. The system doesn't react to the changes of the marketplace. The system is still the system because people are people and principle is principle. So we weren't feeling what the rest of the profession was. But there was a big need and so on. Originally, Dr. Owen and I, we literally did not commit to doing what we're doing now. What we committed to doing was, if you're within 200 miles of where we live and I can leave and be back at my house to sleep in my own bed, we're not going to go out and do the dog and pony show. If we can help you, we'll help you. And that was the objective originally. And then comes this first story I'll tell you. I remember coming into the office, to the clinic, This particular clinic was in Rossville, Georgia. Now, if you don't know about Rossville, Georgia, you can look it up. It's actually in Georgia, but it's about 4 miles as the crow flies from downtown Chattanooga, Tennessee. The state line goes right across there, and this is in Rossville. Rossville is not the up-and-coming area. It's serious decline, but it was in the main thoroughfare that fed the entire northwest Georgia area. All of those people in northwest Georgia had to come up US 27 to get to Chattanooga. So there was a reason why we opened the clinic there. So that I came into that particular clinic and I pulled into the the parking lot, and there's this, like, one old beat up Plymouth, if I remember correctly, or Chevy with pale blue. It had rusted out fender wells, and there was somebody in the car asleep. It's a true story. And in Rossville, you pay attention to that. Who's out there sleeping in our parking lot? So I came in, we got to work, and it was a few minutes. There was one of the staff came back and said, there's a Dr. Vince Scelfo here to see you. I know this is a short show. I can't tell all the details, but basically I said, who's Vince Scelfo? Bring him back to the consultation room. I'll meet with him. I'll never forget that. I'll never in my life forget Vince Scelfo. Vince Scelfo walked in. He was about 5'3", and I said, Dr. Scelfo, how can I help you today? And I said, what's going on? I remember the look. He had this kind of constant sniffle, like a chronic sinus strip. So he's like every 4 or 5 words. And he goes, just desperation and despair. And I'm like, okay, that's a heck of a way to start a conversation. Anyway, all came down to the heart. Remember the heart of AMC? He was an upper cervical. It was Atlas orthogonal, doctor, guys. That is not easy. That's a lot of postgraduate. He was certified Atlas orthogonal. And I was in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Rossville, Georgia. He had driven all night from Saginaw, Michigan, because a young lady that was a proponent for upper cervical care told him about us. Her name was Luella Harris. You guys on the show, you can Google Luella Harris, but she was big and traveled all around telling her story about upper cervical, trying to spread the word. Anyway, Luella Harris had told us, and he had driven through the night without ever contacting us because he thought maybe these are the people that can help you. And the part of that story was that AMC had really not even started. We'd had a couple of meetings, but we didn't have any resources. We did recordings like you have now, Dr. Bursch. We had classes like we had back then. Come to the clinic, and I'll show you how to do it. With basically hand in hand. He was in Saginaw. We paid when we found out about his situation. He was within a week or two of closing his doors, and we paid for him to stay at the Super 8 motel there in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, which is about 5 miles south of there. And he came in and we worked with him day and night. They're late at night. And he had no money. This was in Thanksgiving. This was just before Thanksgiving. I remember this. That is not a time to do marketing. You're either listening. Not a time to do a lot of external marketing. So I remember he had 120 or something patient files was all he had. He had no money. And I sat right there at the desk and we worked up a direct mail piece that would go to those patient files he had. I gave him the money, I gave him the postage, I printed the cards for it, told him what it was. The game plan was, Dr. Scelfo, this is what's going to happen. These 120 is going to produce 6 to 8 new patients. So I guarantee it. When it does, this is what we're going to do. We're going to close 4 to 5 of them. Yes, you are. You're going to close that many. I said, that's going to produce 1 or 2 prepays. I said, you're not allowed to spend that on your rent. We're going to turn it back around and we're going to market. We're going to use that for our marketing. Honest to God, that's why it's one of my favorite stories. It was a real eye-opener for me to realize, holy mackerel, this is really going on everywhere. And he was just one of thousands. But the end of the story was he went home, and that's exactly what happened. We turned back around the marketing piece, and that was just before Thanksgiving, and Christmas, he had already grown so much that he paid all of his overhead and was able to buy Christmas presents for his kids for the first time in 4 years. Dan Scelfo went on to having a very successful career practice. Obviously did not go out. I think within 6 months in the 90s, this was a big deal. We had him doing over $30,000 a month. There's some doctors listening right now that would love to do $30,000 a month. Some of them think that's a drop in the bucket. Let me tell you, in 1995, 94, that was significant when you had a PVA or a PV collection that usually averaged between 35 and 42 back in the days. I probably took up half the show right there telling that story. That's one that I don't tell a lot, but that was the one that got my attention. That was the one that, okay, we need to stop playing around with this whole, if you're within 200-mile radius of Chattanooga, there is a huge need, and we need to figure this out. That's what really catapulted me to a different level. AMC went through explosive growth all through sharing and caring. It started right there. Dr. Scelfo was told, I do this for you. I figure this out. I help you and I walk you through how to do this. Your job is to go find the next Ben Scelfo. And he did. Everybody since then has always had that expectation. That's how you create a family culture of, we're going to do whatever we have to do for you. You're the most important person in front of me in this room is this doctor, but your responsibility is you will go back and find the next. So that's certainly probably one of my favorites. Now, not everybody we work with start out starving, about to go out. That's great. Those are tear-jerking stories, right? Another favorite, I don't know if you had any comments on that or not.
Yeah,
I can go ahead.
There's a lot that stands out in that. Again, not being in practice in the 90s and stuff. Sometimes my perception was that any doctor who was in practice in the 80s going into the 90s, even when HMO was coming in, that their practices were already pretty stellar. And yeah, HMO was hard on people, but they'd already made their money. And like to see where he's got $120 and if nothing were done, he would have been done in practice and all. But also to see, as you were sharing too, just the concepts that he had that were wrong. And oh yeah, I've had those concepts for a long time, and I think it's universal. So I guess it all comes back to, as you've said many times, the principles never change. And yet, again, with my shorter history with chiropractic and AMC, that sounds like a good, almost like tagline in a way. And then now to see and hear a story where in detail, wow, you're right, those principles never did change. And it was when you helped him change his concepts, gave him a little procedure guidance, and then also instilled a little bit of an expectation in him that he didn't have for himself. The fact that you had faith in him. And even for myself, and I think I speak for many of the doctors who have been a part of AMC Align, the fact that you in particular have more faith in us than we do. The fact that you don't give up on us even when we give up on ourselves. That is so much the fabric of the family. And I can't think of any other organization. I can't think of any other chiropractic anything, whether it's school, whether alumni groups or anything, where there is actually that love, that heart, and that willingness to really stand behind people, plug into them, and then allow them to grow and blossom. I just want to say thank you for that, and thank you for helping Dr. Vince back then, and then recognizing that need and being willing to just follow where you were being led. Because let's face it, a lot of us maybe feel that pull to something bigger than ourselves. But most of us, at least early on, try and fight that. We don't want to go with it. And a lot of times we get dragged along kicking and screaming, only to find out that if we would have just jumped on the bandwagon sooner, we would have gotten further, faster, and had so much more of an impact sooner. So, thank you.
Thank you for saying that. It's interesting. Everybody feels chiropractors constantly feel like they're on an island. They don't like letting everybody know what's going on their island. In the same way, there's an aspect of truth to that to me when you say there's nothing else out there like it. You haven't ever seen it. You haven't experienced it. See, I just assume that's the way people treat people, right? That's just my world. My world is treating and looking for the best in others. It's just the way I live. So when you thank me for that, you're just thanking me for being who I am and how my parents taught me to be. And when you see that, I'm a firm believer that everybody, not personality, not the greatest personalities or the most talented chiropractors, every chiropractor has unforeseen potential. That's what potential is, folks. Potential is nothing more than truth in waiting. Your potential, your God-given potential. When Vince Scelfo, when he experienced that, are you telling me that potential wasn't already there? He just didn't know how to believe it and act upon it, to experience it. That's objective. That's the goal. It was with any chiropractor, is to recognize that there is unforeseen or untapped potential. Potential is nothing more than truth in waiting. It's already true. If it wasn't true, then it wouldn't manifest itself. It's already true. You just have to start believing in it and knowing how to act on it. And I firmly believe everyone has God-given potential that is untapped. But I know we've already used up almost all the time on this particular show, and I think you were wanting me to tell all kinds of different stories. But I thought before we wrap this show up, and we might make this a part 1, part 2. What do you say, Dr. Bursch?
Yeah, happy to do that.
I think that's the only way for you to get out of it what you're wanting to, because as you asked me that a while ago, I just started jotting down names that just started popping in my head. I've got 5 or 6, 7 more stories I could tell that, trust me, it's not about just a storytelling session. There's essence to each story. And Scelfo had to be submissive, and he had to be willing to work, and he had to humble himself. He had to humble himself to even get in the car and drive that far and ask for help. Sometimes that's the biggest thing is, folks, why don't you just ask for help? If you're listening today and you're struggling in any way, and the next story I want to tell before we wrap the show up is the complete opposite of Vince Scelfo. Either way, there's different levels of success, and there's different levels or qualities or types of success at any one level. But you've got to be willing to submit. Like the word says, submit yourself. And through the renewing of your mind, then and only then will you know the perfect and acceptable will of it. Comes from submission first. So you have to submit, humbly request. So you got to ask for help. Contact AMC today. That's what we hear. That's what we do. And we're still the only one that's out there willing to do it. That if you don't grow, you don't know anyway. So what do you have to risk? But I know let me give you another end of the spectrum just for this show. Okay. I'm going to give you one that was one of my favorites, and that was Dr. Bo Warlick. Now, Dr. Bo Warlick is a name that some of you are going to go, I know that guy. Why? Because he was the epitome of Gonstead. He was still is, the major influencer in the Gonstead technique. All right. So again, telling stories that you probably long ago that you don't remember, but Dr. Bo was practicing at $1 million a year practice out in Phoenix, Arizona with his associates. They were seeing thousands of office visits a month. Even then, that would have been back the early 2000s. So you're still talking about a different world of PVC, patient visit collection average. They were doing into the millions. So what's so unique about that, right? How do you take somebody that's already doing multi-millions, that's already seeing thousands of patient visits? What in the world can you offer to that guy? Just because, don't confuse motion with progress. He was burning the candle at both ends to play that volume game. And that's what it is. There's an old saying that my dad used to tell me. He says, son, he goes, and Dad was a pilot. You have to understand that. For that matter, I guess I've got my pilot's license. In flying, I would say, in flying, there's old pilots and there's bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots. And then he would follow that up with, and in practice, he goes, there's old practitioners and there's volume practitioners. There are no old volume practitioners. And that is so true. So whether you want to, regardless of it all comes down to the efficiency of the model. And Bo Warlick was doing all of that. But how do you take a practice that has so many different associates? They're all seeing thousands of visits a month, but they're doing it inefficiently. So that was one that I enjoyed myself. I always look back at it and go, you know what? That you can't, that's not the next marketing company. That's not the next niche. He didn't need a niche plugged into his practice to make him successful. He needed somebody that knew how to run multiple clinics with multiple associates and how to do and streamline it and make it efficient. And that's that principle that you've heard me teach, Dr. Bursch, over the years. You've heard me say that. Everything, every system, every practice, every business will start breaking down when the efficiency starts breaking down. So everything's great up until the efficiency starts to get stressed. You can't outgrow a stress point. Can't do it. I can't do it. You can't do it. No listener can outgrow a stress point. Can't outgrow a stress point in a relationship. If there's a stress point in my marriage, I've been married 21 years this year. Trust me, my marriage isn't any better as long as that stress point's there. Same thing goes for Bo Warlick's practice. How do you take one of the leaders in the country? He had one of the biggest practices in the country. You step in and you make it streamlined, make it more efficient, and you have wisdom, you have knowledge, you have to understand the undercurrent of the principles and where they fit to even recognize it. Because Bo was blind to it. We came in there, we streamlined that practice, built up the support to the foundations of that model that he was running. And the practice did exactly what I told you that formula does. When efficiency and proficiency down, productivity and profitability will break down. Okay. But just the opposite. When you make something more efficient and you make it more proficient, it's going to automatically be more productive and profitable. So in that instance, that practice streamlined, the stress points came way, way down for the doctors and the profitability, the income up 30%. I just said multi-millions and it grew by 30%. I don't know if that's the most heartfelt story. You just asked me for some of my favorite over the years. That was a challenge. That was I knew when Bo approached us, we better have our stuff together to navigate that. Goes like along with Dr. Dale Williams and his group right now up in Montana. Dr. Dale's been practicing for 20-something years. They've got 6 clinics. They've got, I think, 7 different doctors. They were all operating with different processes of how they processed their patients. So he has 6 clinics. They were doing pretty good, right? And that's current. That's a current member. The whole group's current members with AMC. They had looked at anything and everything to help them. What did AMC do? AMC came along and created a more efficient and proficient system that they each could continuity. So they knew that as one patient saw one doctor one day, they could see Dr. Bursch another day, and vice versa, or Dr. Jordan one day, or what clinic they were at. When you know the patient having the same experience with each and every doctor, the staff knows that, it's going to be much more efficient, proficient, what's happening in all those offices that they had not been able to figure out how to grow all these years. They have grown exponentially by doing what? Becoming a whole lot more efficient. They're getting a lot more referrals. And they're not having to burn the candle at both ends. There's an old Dr. Bursch that says, blessed those that go in circles, for they shall be called wheels. Confuse motion with progress. And Dr. Bowe was one of my stories on that. He was, don't confuse motion with progress. Yes, he was doing multi-millions in collections. He was spending multi-millions and that's not your average cat to take on. Anyway, I could keep going, and I probably have more stories to go. If you want this a part 2, I'm happy to do that. However you'd like to.
Sure. And just as you're sharing that too, about Dr. Bowe, the efficiency side of it, one of the most profound changes for me was that when I would hit these ceilings and stuff in practice, or these different struggles, well, before AMC and before a lot of, let's just say, high-level psychiatric work done by my mentors over the years, whenever I would hit something like that, it was always a question of what's wrong with me. And it was always internalized as far as something was wrong with me. I was in some way failing. I was in some way a failure. And now when I hit those roadblocks, I can just tell you that my mindset is so different, because my immediate question now is just, okay, where is the breakdown in efficiency? Or how do we improve the efficiency so that changes? And there again, that's just a profound difference in even my whole identity, which I know is a whole nother rabbit trail we can go down very easily. But I just know that if it hadn't been for Dr. Terrence, who referred me to AMC so many years ago, he hadn't brought me, paid my way, got me to my first summit, and introduced me. And I just still remember that first class, and you were going through how to do a handshake, and I was just like blown away by that and thinking, man, if there's that much to a handshake that makes a difference, I got to know how all this works. And you all took me under your wing and stuff. But just to see that huge concept difference for me, and I think that many of us, again, and I don't even know if it's just chiropractors, but just many of us, if there's something that doesn't go right, we right away just start shooting ourselves. We're the issue. We're the problem. And albeit we can be at times, at the same time, if we're applying the principle and working to do that, then it isn't so much us as much as, again, that efficiency. How do we make the process better and things like that? So very freeing to basically not beat myself up every time something doesn't go as I would hope.
That's good stuff. Good stuff. I vote we wrap it up for today, because through the stories, there's principles, there's things you can pull out of it, and you could actually apply it, or at least recognize that things need to be addressed within your own practice and within what you're dealing with, because you'll resonate with some of these stories. So there's a reason why your POC, your patient orientation class, or whatever your health talks, whatever you call them, you motivate yourself through reason and fact. You will always motivate others through emotion. And there's a reason why the most read book in history, called the Bible, what did Jesus do? All Jesus did was do 2 things: tell stories and ask questions. Now, we're not going to talk about the question principle on the this show or the next. But there's principles in the way Jesus himself tried to convey those messages. That's what the purpose, I think, Dr. Bursch was wanting to do, was just pull out some of these stories. And there's too many. That's the problem. I could sit here and just do show after show, but hopefully something's resonating with you and you're getting out of it. So let's wrap it up for today. Folks, I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate you, Dr. Bursch, for joining me. So with that, folks, make it a fantastic, great, productive week. It's your week. It's your week to serve. So make a difference in someone else's life. God bless.
Thank you.
Follow our show. You can share it with friends, of course. And we'd love for you to contact us at mailbag@amcfamily.com. In addition, you're always invited to attend or join us at a summit. Of course, registration is required. And we would love for you to check out the loads of free content we provide to social media every single week. Until next time.